Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Beauty Marketing Asia podcast. I'm your host, Joe Escobedo. And joining us today is Denise, who has been a longtime friend. She is a content and campaigns manager, global marketing at Baker McKenzie. There's so many different exciting topics we're going to touch on today, from stakeholder management, collaboration, micro campaigns, segmentation, and the state of research. So maybe we start with one of them.
Sure. So I think the day-to-day thing for me, I always tell my team that we are content and campaigns team, but 80% of our job is a relationship management role, whether or not that's people you're working with directly on producing a campaign, or you're thinking about approvers or the external audience. It's all about the relationship management. And so some of the things that I like to do and things I'm constantly doing now is what I like to call giving approvers or decision makers an easy yes. So, a lot of the times, right, people that you're going to for approvals, they're going to be tied up with 1,001 things. So whenever I present something to them, whether it's at the ideation phase or whether it's the final approval of a specific asset, I always like to give them specific options with a rationale that's tied to that. We are going with this format because we have seen the traction in the past for this format is X% higher than the other format. And then you always want to minimize the back and forth between self and the approvers or the decision makers. So I always try to give them at least 5 working days. And normally, if I need the approval within 3 working days, I would give it, or rather the other way around, I give them longer than what I actually need. So maybe I need it in 7 days, I tell them 5 days to give them that buffer. So I think it's really about that communication. It's really about giving them mini milestones to look at instead of giving them like a laundry list of the 10 touch points you're going to need with them throughout the entire production and activation and measurement of a campaign.
Yeah, so if I heard that correctly, you talked about giving them options. That in terms of options of different formats. So for example, you say, here's when you do either audio or video or text or whatever, and
Yeah,
then
so
based on the results, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would do is at the ideation phase, I give them a table basically, and I give them all the different options or what they could pursue based on the budget that we have. For example, this option A has an external vendor, it's got a video component, it's got a full social media sponsored campaign for 2 months that runs behind it. And then maybe option B says no external vendor. We are repurposing some of the content that we already have, but we are bringing in one external voice. It's going to be housed here, but there's a media partnership in play. So giving them different things to look at within each of the options, but framing all as good choices, just which one they want to go to. So they feel good about themselves, and also it builds that confidence that they have in you right off the bat in the project. So that's what I mean by giving them options. Or when it's coming to the time to procure codes, right, from your specific subject matter experts, I give them an option to build the code. And these are the bullet points on which they should build their codes. That's option one. The second option is I offer to draft the code. And often by that point, I already have a code drafted on standby. So giving them an easy way to give you what you need, which is the code, either giving them pointers or giving them the actual code to edit. The other thing I like to do is I also really contextualize where their code's going to be. This is the topic, this is the paragraph that would come before, this is the paragraph that would come after. So it's very clear for them within 5 minutes, they should be able to, if they have that 5 minutes, they should be able to sit there and get the reply to you really quickly.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about this from a glutton's point of view of restaurants. If you have a set menu, you make it almost dummy-proof versus an entire restaurant has like a million dishes. Yeah, I think that's a very simplified way of thinking on it. And also, like I said, it makes it easier for them too, because this may not be their top priority. So they might go, oh yeah, I'll take option one and maybe a little bit of option dessert for option three kind of thing.
Yeah.
So once again, easier for them to digest.
Correct. Particularly because I'm in the professional services industry, right? A lot of the people that I'm working with to get quotes from, they're likely fee earners who, where their time would be spent on billable hours, even in consultancy and things like that, or accountancy. They don't have that time to sit down and give you like 1 hour of their day. It's just not a feasible thing to expect. So part of what I see as part of our jobs as content marketing strategists is to really think it through for them.
Yeah, I guess 2 questions off the back of that. First of which is, how do you get them on board? Because like you said, this maybe isn't part of their job. They're not getting paid for this particular work.
Yeah.
How do you get them involved first off?
I think looking at what your activation strategy is, and if there's a certain level of like positive exposure that person is going to get, whether or not that's with the media or social media, a lot of people out there are interested in building their network professionally or having constant flow of content on their LinkedIn and things like that. So that's one way to go with it. I think the second thing is also giving them that due respect and say, you know what, you are the subject matter expert. We need to be able to position you as part of this company as being the expert in the space. And one way we want to do that is by linking your expertise and your experience with your client out there or people that you work with a very current business issue that's happening right now. So giving them that buy-in in terms of what you're going to say is going to be relevant, is going to be consumed by an audience that you yourself are looking at, and also looking at from a company standpoint, right? Positioning themselves as a thought leader, as a spokesperson for the company. That's another way to go through it.
Yeah, I like how you thought about it from the individual's point of view and then later towards the company. Because if you think about it for individual, I'm doing it for my own ego a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to be out in the media, or I want to have speaking opportunities, or I wanted to, on the flip side, help on the business development side. If I'm getting in front of the right target audience, it's going to help me that way. So I think that makes perfect sense. The other question I wanted to ask you was around follow-up. Let's say you give them 5 days and you need it in 7 days, but they still haven't gotten you what you need. What's your tips in terms of following up with some of these folks?
I always think of it from a couple of avenues, right? The first thing, is it just a time crunch? Are they busy or hung up with something and they can't get back to you? Then you're going to a personal assistant. Then you're going to maybe somebody who works on their team and you're saying, could I get the approval from you instead if this person is too busy? So that's one thing I look at. Sometimes it's a matter of they simply don't really agree with the points that you've raised as a suggestion to their code. So again, that brings me to the point on collaboration as well, which I'm really a big proponent for in my team and in my firm. So always go to the people who are working with the person that you're trying to get the reply. They would know best what the ways to get to this person. Is it a quick Skype message? Is it a quick Teams message? Is that some people don't go through email? They literally want to get on a call for 5 minutes. So finding what the right way to get the response is okay. But the other thing is that always going to be times when people don't respond. So in the past, what I have seen as helpful, if I don't hear from you by this date, would it be okay for me to use this code? And that's a longer deadline. I normally leave it to almost the end of production. So if they don't do that, and if they don't even respond to that, I will try one more push. But if not, I always have a list of backup spokespeople and codes ready on the side. Also, sometimes when you think about it, there's a lot of content saturation out there. So if you've really got like 8 codes in your content, maybe you could drop one, right? So if that person doesn't reply to you in time for the main asset to feature that code, I've always offered to use that code as part of a social media push down the line, or picking out that social media code and putting it into, I don't know, an infographic that we release as part of a retargeting asset.
Got it. So I'm thinking about it in terms of movies now, like casting different actors or actresses. You have your Leonardo DiCaprio's and your Scarlett Johansson's, and it's like the main stars. For some reason, they're not able to join the production. Then you have other folks who can fill in on some of those roles. So having a backup, I think, is really important, because a lot of times we don't do that. We just say, okay, we're going to go with whoever the A-list celebrity is or the kind of top expert. And a lot of times they're super busy and they're very difficult to get in touch with. So I like the idea of having backups in mind.
Yeah, I always think about when we're looking for spokespeople, whether it's codes or contributions or in any other way, or even as advocates for that particular campaign, I always think about the diversity that's involved in that. And you're not just talking gender or racial diversity, you're talking about demographics in terms of seniority within the firm, you're talking about jurisdictions. And most of the time, if you do appeal to people based on this fact that you are selecting them not just for their expertise, but also as a chance to feature a more diverse range of voices in a particular project, most people are going to respond more quickly and more without less, how shall we say this, challenge.
Yeah. So I could see it from like a races and gender and things like that. In terms of seniority, because this is something I've constantly been pushing on, but it's very difficult for many organizations to get over this, is they think that all the spokespeople have to be like the CEO, the CMO, CFO, and so on. and it's never someone a mid-level manager or even
Correct.
below that. So what are your thoughts on that? Is there any benefits of, obviously it sounds like there is, but what are some of the benefits of featuring maybe someone who's not as senior?
I think the first thing that comes to my head is humanization, right? The whole point of diversity is to have a range of opinions, is to have a range of experience behind that opinion. Also, if you're thinking about going out to an external audience, while you may be aiming your content at a C-suite audience, you never know who else is going to pick up and read on it. And the mid-level managers of the day are going to be the C-suite group of the next decade or so. So it's also an investment in looking at what those people are interested in, and in your mind, looking at what the trajectory of that content traction is going to be down the line. I always think that it's also a showcase of mentorship, right, within your company. If you are featuring somebody who's not so senior, they could be working with somebody who's quite senior in your company. And that also is a way to promote collaboration within other departments in your company as well. And I believe that in marketing, we're in a very unique position. We're not in business development per se. We are not fee earners in that professional services sense, but you do get a lot of opportunity to build the relationships and to build relationships not just between yourself and another department, but between other people as well. And I think that kind of just adds a layer of value to the job.
Yeah, you mentioned marketing, but I think putting a sales hat on, it's also really important because a lot of people underestimate the mid-level managers, like how much power they have, especially when it comes to budgets and approval. Like a lot of times, if they're looking for a potential vendor, it's going to be the mid-level manager who's doing the research, generally not like a senior folk or a director. They probably won't get involved in any of that. They're like, okay, if you say so, sure, I'll go ahead with that.
Yeah, and sits on your head, right? So I think you're absolutely right. Mid-level managers make a lot of decisions, and they may sometimes be seen as micro decisions, right? But at the end of the day, they are really the ones who have to answer upwards and also mentor downwards, right? So you are a role model in a sense, and your constant focus is on building your team up and helping them to grow and helping them find new challenges to break through. And so a lot of the times, the decisions that they may make, you're behind them 100%, and then you take that responsibility on. It's a very unique place to be, but I believe that is the place, at least for me, where I'm growing the most.
Awesome. Another thing I want to get your thoughts on is micro campaigns. What the heck are micro campaigns, first off?
Micro campaigns, I think it just says what it actually is. It's like a tiny version of a campaign. And I think it's something that I've really been invested in the last couple of years. There's a big resource crunch, right? There's a big demand for content that we've seen since the COVID era and things like that. But there's also like a big culture of access. So I really want to overturn that mindset and really think about the fact that everyone says start with a content library. But when you're in the middle and in the thick of things, it's not always feasible to tell your whole team, hey, stop for 1 week. Let's compile everything that we have. So looking at micro campaigns, what have we already produced? Where have they been launched? What are the audience sets we have previously approached? Let's look at the metrics. Which part of the content is gaining the most traction? Which parts of this content is evergreen? And then picking out, right, whether or not it's out of 10 key takeaways, you're picking out 3, or whether you're changing the format. So for example, there were a couple that I've done and my team has worked on together. One was a flagship thought leadership report that went out. One of those massive 20-page PDFs with embedded videos and interactive charts. And yeah, it did well, right? Because there was a good activation strategy behind that. What the team did was we worked together with business development and we took all the key topics in that thought leadership and we developed that into a series of 5 webinars. And then from the webinars, we ran Q&As and we did polls during the webinars. And from there, the content that we got out of the webinars, we turned into LinkedIn articles. So that campaign launched in January, and we have continued to see traction until October because there was a good micro campaign kind of assets. We never planned it as one big push, but there were so many constant touch points, and we constantly kind of changed the format and then narrowed down the audience targeting along the way. So that's an example of a micro campaign that we did.
Got it. So if I heard that correctly, it started with a 20-page research report.
Yep, like a white paper style.
White paper, yeah. And then funneled down into, you said, a series of 5 webinars, pulling information from that original piece of content. And then based on the, yeah.
based on the webinar, we produced LinkedIn articles that were fronted by specific subject matter experts, and that went out not just through a global corporate social media channel, it also went out on the individuals' LinkedIn profiles as well.
Okay. When you talk about LinkedIn articles, are you mentioning like the full like blog style articles that you can publish on? Or are you talking like more social
Yeah.
posts?
Yeah, we did like the full articles. We did so with the social media side, right? With micro campaigns, social media is one of the best platforms. And I think particularly LinkedIn, they offer so many different ways for you to do organic and sponsored posts. Of course, as a marketer, I would say if you want that traction, then go for the sponsored post. But think really carefully about how you're going to spend that money. With micro campaigns, you really have to think about what format are you going out with, and then what is the corresponding kind of metric you would look at as ROI or as a measure of success. Because I think a common misconception is that you put X amount of money behind a post and you just look at the engagement rate, and that's just not enough. If it's a video, you want to look at completion rate. If it's a post, you want to look at the click rate. It really, really depends.
Yeah. So for the LinkedIn articles, I'm curious, how do you decide who features on their profile?
So what we look at again is based on the webinar feedback for that particular example I talked about, which of the topics seem to be the most interesting to the audience. And then we go to the subject matter experts who front that specific area of subject matter. And then the other thing that we did as well is that we made sure we covered jurisdictions. So basically, if we have a couple of people from different parts around the world who have a different perspective on that same topic that everyone's interested in, they co-wrote the article together. So again, back to that collaboration piece, which also externally, right? It lets your audience know there's a certain breadth of coverage that you have and not just the depth of your expertise as well.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. So going back to your thing about obviously putting money behind it, if you're getting into the hands and you're leveraging it of the people behind the brand, that can almost be more effective sometimes, because if they have good
Yes.
relationships in a particular network or a particular industry, then honestly, it's almost as good, if not better, a lot of the times.
Yeah, I think kind of social amplification through that kind of advocacy is really the best. These people, these subject matter experts, these people that you work with, the approvers, the decision makers, often they're going to be part of a lot of LinkedIn interest groups, or they exhibit a lot of LinkedIn behaviors that match your target audience. And therefore, if you're going to put money behind the post and the algorithm feeds into that, then you're likely going to get stronger responses. Also, the other thing is that it's the humanization, right? It's a personal touch. It's not just something that's going out from corporate, it's going out from a real person with a real job with real thoughts.
Exactly. I think this is no more important than professional services, because at the end of the day, yes, you're buying Baker McKenzie, but you're buying Denise, you're buying whoever it is working the company.
Yeah.
We forget about that a lot of times, that people are buying the individuals behind the brand. And if
Yeah.
I see their content and they're like, oh, this person looks interesting, and they're like they're an expert, I'm more inclined to work with them as an individual and obviously with an organization.
You're buying a relationship, you're buying trust, right? And that's what you're really selling at the end of the day, because you could have all the knowledge about a specific service or product, but if you aren't able to translate that into a way that your customer feels like it's meant for them, or you're tweaking it for them, or you understand specifically what their current needs and challenges are, or what their needs and challenges are down the road, and you're preparing them for that, then that relationship either short-lived or not going to work out.
Yeah, exactly. And I know you guys have launched the podcast recently as well, too. I saw that thing. And that is another, at least for us, another opportunity to leverage some of that existing content. I'm happy to share how we do it, but I'm keen to hear that could be another way to break up micro content.
Yeah, exactly. That is one of the reasons why we've relaunched this podcast. So when the pandemic started, the firm came out with a framework called 3R. So it's resilience, recovery, and renewal. And we started the 3R podcast, where we started to bring in a lot of the different industry groups and practice groups that we have within the firm, bringing in different voices, internal and external. and really talking about the issues that businesses were facing then in those quick bite-sized podcasts. So people listen to it, not commuting to work when you're having coffee, when you're going out for a short walk. So we found that while some of the content is still evergreen, much of the tonality and that ambience around the resilience and recovery still exists, but perhaps not as strongly as it was in 2019, 2020. So what we've done is that with a new brand campaign, Solutions for Connected World, we've launched a Solutions for Connected World podcast. The concept here is, again, it's the basis of collaboration. It's different expertise areas. We recognize that clients are looking for a one-stop solution, but that one-stop solution looks so different to different clients. And you really have to start to bridge what are the different, for us, what the different legal services are, where are the real intersections of legal and business issues that we could discuss in simple ways without all that context. So I think a lot of content in this day and age, we spend so much time building up the context. But if you think about it, if you got your audience targeting right, these are the people who are living and breathing that context, right? So you should just jump right straight into what the problem solution framework, or whether or not it's extending a certain line of abstract thought about going into the future and anticipating whatever the needs are. So I think a podcast is a great way to do it. Again, conversational, humanizes, showcases a diversity of expert voices, easily accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I think that's on top of that is that it's a series as well, too, because I think a lot of the times you're constantly talking about campaigns, and I think they have their place in certain times, particularly in retail, Black Friday and 11/11. That makes sense. But for the most part, I think a lot of organizations really abuse them, or not really abuse them, but misuse them. So
Saturated.
I personally, it's very saturated. So I personally obviously love the idea of series, because that's how we built businesses over the years. It's writing different series where people get used to it and they get excited about it. For example, once they listen to the first episode, they're like, oh, okay, I want to find out what the next one is. Versus you run one campaign and they get to find out a couple quarters later, okay, here's another random thing that we're doing.
So what we do with each of the podcast episodes that we have, we always have complementary content or complementary campaign that goes along with that. So it could be a tangential kind of association, or it could be one of the key areas that we are featuring in a specific thought leadership campaign or marketing campaign. And we bring that kernel of an idea and we translate that, or transpose that rather, into a podcast episode. Another thing that I really love about podcasts is that when you have a variety of voices in your podcast, there's kind of something for everyone. People can pick and choose where they want to align with. They can start to empathize or identify different speakers or different opinions from different speakers. And that gives them a sense of they're not just saying what I want to hear, they're saying things that I didn't know I need to hear. And now I'm.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your example earlier of like at least for me, the set menu. So you're giving them kind of a set menu of all the different topics that they can choose from, and they can decide which they want, rather than saying, okay, you only have to listen to this one over and over, which I think most organizations do. You give them the options. So I think that's a common thread I'm seeing across, whether it's internally or externally. You give your audience the options. What do you want to consume? Which one do you want to pursue? And then they can decide amongst themselves. I'm curious, is there anything that I haven't asked you already?
I think the only thing was you mentioned a series approach, which is something that here at Baker McKenzie we found to be super useful as well. Again, it links back to that idea of that culture of access. So a lot of the times, I think in the past, white papers used to be important, research, proprietary data, econometric data. So I think the tide is really changing on that one. We really have to find different ways to present data, but match them, right, with opinions, human opinions. And the series approach is a great way to do it instead of having a really large report, which, don't get me wrong, sometimes works. It's a lot more, it's better for your dollar, right? Especially if it's a sponsored campaign, to have something that you can build traction and engagement throughout a couple of months. So an example was we had a flagship report that used to run for years and it did pretty well. But we went to the group and we said, as a sort of marketing experiment, we want to turn this into a 5-part series where we release one mini report every month. But there's a common thread that runs through the 5. And out of that, we were able to feature 50 partners across the firm within that, and we create a sponsored social media campaign post as well. But there was so much collaboration among so many different departments. It turned out to be a big success, not just because the content became relevant, more succinct, shorter to the point. There was a constant cadence, right, of the content, but really the relationships that were being built between BD and partners, between marketing and BD, it really worked out. So I think with every new thing that you might try within your company, while there is a certain element of risk that normally relates to ROI, but if you bit by bit and you really plan it out in a way that has that balance of suiting your internal audience, but most importantly, catering to what the external audience wants, I think it is always a worthwhile investment.
So thank you so much for watching and listening to today's episode. Really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.